Board, introduce our guest and guide us through tonight's discussion. Thanks again and enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. It is truly a pleasure to be here this evening. And as Dr. Davis has indicated, I also want to welcome everyone in the audience and to those attending by the Zoom meeting link. We're so glad to have you attend the inaugural Roundtable 2, and our topic this evening is on the impact of incarceration on community health and integrity. The Division of Civilian Oversight is unique in that we have two boards of directors that includes the Detention Facilities Oversight Board and the Civilian Oversight Board. Our office is part of the city's Department of Public Safety, and you may know that the Public Safety Department is the largest department of city government. Our office has the responsibility to investigate allegations of misconduct by the detention facility or the City Justice Center. We are a partner with the City Justice Center, and I believe that from the objectivity of an investigation, that we will and we can work together to address any recommendations provided by investigations conducted by our office. Our aim for the roundtable is to not only to identify and discuss key challenges, but to actively work towards finding viable solutions. So this evening, you will hear from our panelists. And before I introduce them, let me tell you about our ground rules. Each presenter will have no more than 15 minutes for their presentation. Dotlin is in the audience, and she is our timekeeper, and she will be prompting you at the 10-minute period all the way down to no more minutes available. Following the presentations, the roundtable is open for audience questions. To those attending remotely, we will seek to obtain your questions in the chat room from the Zoom link. We encourage everyone to listen with an open mind, one person speaking at a time, respectful communications. We attack problems, not people. So the bathrooms, if anyone needs to access the facilities, are to your right as you exit through the door. So how does health impact members of our community who are impacted? I will share with you a personal situation in which my brother, a very successful businessman in the Chicago area, became incarcerated at Cook County Jail. When we learned of my brother becoming incarcerated, we immediately got in our cars and went to Chicago. We thought we would be up there for 1 or 2 hours, and it was an all-day experience. When my brother was leaving Cook County Jail, very tall man, he was completely, from his posture, very dejected, having had that experience. So as a family, we rallied around my brother. Unfortunately, the rallying around was not enough to save his life. So I'm just sharing with you that when we think about incarceration, it can happen to anyone. When we think about its impact related to health, we look at conditions where there is delayed or denied treatment, staffing and resources are a consideration, mental health neglect, a significant number of individuals who may be incarcerated may have mental health issues. Inadequate management of pre-existing conditions with chronic illnesses or acute medical conditions, Excessive force can result in severe injuries or death. Restraint methods can also be lethal, impacting an individual's life. Extreme temperatures. There are all of these different aspects and variables that contribute to the individual who is in custody, as well as the impact upon family members, as well as impact within the community. I come from a family in which my father was a minister, and he became a emeritus superintendent through the Church of God in Christ. So as community learned about what was happening to my brother, people were asking, what happened? What did we do wrong? And I felt, as the oldest of 7 siblings, that I was glad that my parents are not alive so that they would not have to experience this heartache. So I am digressing from my notes. I want to introduce our presenters. Our first speaker is going to be Blake Strode, who is the Executive Director of Art City Defenders. Forgive me if I mispronounced your last name. Art City Defenders is a nonprofit, holistic legal advocacy organization in St. Louis. Blake is a St. Louis native and joined Art City as a Skadden Fellow in 2015 after graduating from Harvard Law School. Blake helped to establish the Civil Rights Litigations Unit at Art City Defenders, which has brought challenges to a variety of unlawful and predatory practices, including debtors' prison, police misconduct, and inhumane jail conditions. Blake's organization has filed more than 60 civil rights cases in state and federal court, impacting upwards of 50,000 people in the St. Louis region and generating more than $20 million in damages. He is also a co-host of a podcast, Under the Arch. Following Blake will be Reddit Hudson. And Reddit is an investigator in our office who has worked in diversion and alternative sentencing for the St. Louis Circuit Attorney's Office. He's the past vice president of civil rights and advocacy for the Urban League of Metropolitan St. Louis. He's a former member of the national staff of the NAACP, having served as a regional field organizer for 10 states within the Midwest. He's a co-founder of the National Coalition of Law Enforcement Officers for Justice Reform. Reddit has been featured on regular media, including our own TV One News, One Now with Roland Martin, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. Louisa Lyles is an experienced investigator with 30 years in the field. She currently holds the position of Legal Investigator 2 in our office. And before her role in our office, she spent 14 years with the St. Louis City Division of Corrections as a corrections investigator and lieutenant. During her time at the Division of Corrections, she developed and implemented the Internal Affairs Unit for Corrections. Actually, Jesse will be first, and Blake will be second. And Jesse Bogan is an investigator reporter in St. Louis for the Marshall Project. The Marshall Project, a nonprofit journalism organization created a decade ago to shed light on mass incarceration in American society. The Marshall Project is named after Thurgood Marshall. Mr. Marshall was an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court and American civil rights attorney. Jesse is a Missouri native with about 25 years of reporting experience. He started out as a night cops reporter in San Antonio and went on to cover immigration from both sides of the Texas-Mexico border. He's followed United States troops to Iraq and Afghanistan. He's been on the front line of the St. Louis region's biggest issues since he moved to the city in 2010. As a reporter, Jesse strives to find stories about people in the margins who aren't being talked about or their conditions. That often leads to people tangle up in a criminal justice system. So without further ado, we will have Jesse come up. Blake will follow him, Reddit, and then Louisa. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Commissioner. Can you hear me? Jesse Bogan. Like she said, I'm a reporter. And so I was just talking to Blake Strode a little bit, but where we started is as a member of the media, maybe you've heard that our industry has been in decline. And the main point of our industry is to get stories out there so the community can come up with good solutions, to be informed and find solutions to these complex problems. We haven't been doing a good enough job, you may have heard. And so those who come in to pick up the slack are some public interest law firms who no longer are going to wait for the community to make the right choice. They're going to make things happen in the courtroom. Even though the Marshall Project is named after a legendary attorney, we are a group of journalists, and it was formed about 10 years ago to try to untangle mass incarceration. And it was founded in New York. The last couple of years, they've been opening up some local newsrooms, one in Cleveland, one in Jackson, Mississippi, and one here in St. Louis. And so I'm based here in St. Louis. I used to work at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch a long time. And then I have two colleagues as well who are here. And so I introduced that way because here's this great mission. We want to be additive to the other stories that are already being told by hardworking journalists who are here. We're not trying to scoop the competition. We're trying to support other journalists and also continue to do investigative reporting. And so we're less than a year into it here in St. Louis. So clean slate, you're in my shoes. You're not a columnist, you're an investigative reporter. What's going to be your first story? I wonder what yours would be, sir. What would be the first story you would want to write as a journalist? You have some experience in this community. There's yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, there's so many issues, and I decided with Missouri as my boundary, I decided to focus on this question, and I wasn't going for the tip of the iceberg, the latest scandal, the latest headline, but the iceberg, the systemic issue. And I settled on this one. Why does the city jail system continue to struggle? Why hasn't there been lasting change despite new buildings and leaders? So I visited with a ton of people to try to answer this question, including everyone who led the corrections division since the City Justice Center opened in 2002. I got a guided tour of the jail. I requested a bunch of records and hounded the city to produce those records, like the basic roster of who's in the jail and how long they've been there. I requested all the deaths in custody since City Justice Center opened. And I read a lot of stories and I read a lot of lawsuits. Lots of info. I started writing, and I don't know about you all, but I got to do a lot of rewriting and condensing until finally a story emerged. And that story was titled, St. Louis Jail is a Potential Powder Keg. A facility built for progress reflects decades of neglect, the city's deepest struggles, from mental illness to systemic dysfunction. That you are here signals that maybe you would have come up with a similar story or topic. That signals that that you care, that you're here. And so thanks for that. Look around. It's a small, intimate group, but we're all here to talk about this issue. That's worth taking note. I say that because indifference is an obstacle to progress. You all know that. You've been working in the community a long time. Back to that question, the root question. Why does the jail system continue to fail? Or perhaps there's a better suited question for this roundtable that's looking for some solutions too. What can we do about the city jail? Well, it turns out the Missouri Public Interest Research Group Foundation beat us to that question back in 1973. Here's their published report. It's available from the public library, a few blocks down from the jail. What can we do about the city jail? So I tried to take this back to the dinosaurs to learn everything about the jail system, and I came up with this report, one of the awesome librarians over there in the St. Louis room. I'm just going to read the first sentence. The city jail is St. Louis's most prominent example of community indifference to the decay of our correctional system. The city jail is St. Louis's most prominent example of the community indifference to the decay of our correctional system. Anybody remember the city jail? I've been here since 2010, and I grew up outstate, and we drive the Greyhound through town, and so we get a little bit of time in St. Louis. Okay, there we go. One thing I heard about the city jail, you tell me, I'm going to fact check this a little bit. It was built to fanfare in 1915. State of the art. Eventually, lots of people with mental illness ended up inside. They used to yell at people walking by, at the Opera House, at City Hall. It's gone now. It's across from the medical examiner's office. It's a parking lot. That was new to me. To fanfare, St. Louis City Justice Center replaced City Jail in 2002. Since the workhouse closed, City Justice Center is our jail. Do you know where it is? Is it 200 South Tucker? Now, you guys and gals, I recognize some faces here. You're pretty informed with this safety network in St. Louis, so we're going to have a little bit of a different discussion. But I hope there's a couple people watching online at least too. Last week, I stood out in front of the jail and did some high power reporting. I just walked up there and talked to people passing by the building. I said, don't look at the sign, but do you know what that building is? Somebody walking by, government building? I don't know. A couple from here from Boston. They said there are a lot of vacant buildings. I don't know. Hotel? Is it a hotel? That's getting close. Yesterday, by phone, I asked somebody in the local nonprofit world here. She wasn't exactly sure where the jail is in St. Louis. In the city and in the county, they blend in. They're hidden in plain sight. So as a journalist, I'm not coming to you with all the answers, but with a lot of questions too. Does it matter if people don't know where the jail is? Does it matter? I think it'd probably matter depending on who you are, if you're inside or outside of it. If you owned a building across the street from it, maybe it would matter a little more to you that it blend in. But regardless, that place was built and it replaced an outdated building. And so that's an old building that now it's what, going on 25 years old, almost more than 2 decades old. There it is at 200 South Tucker, as you pointed out. What's going on inside the CJC, as it's called? Real quick, since it opened in 2002, dozens have died in custody. By the time my story came out in April, the exact number was 46 people had died. 29 of them died at the hospital. Now, a few more of them have died since, so nearly about 50 people. And causes of death range from acute fentanyl intoxication to acute asthma. I have the report. I don't want to, there's a whole lot to study on any one of these issues. And the point of this story is to look at, there's a myriad of issues. And I don't want one issue to overshadow the next because the problem is complex. So yes, this is a place where people have died, but what is it like for people to live there? It's nearly full. A fourth of them are on psychotropic medication. More than 50 of them, the last time I was able to verify, have been there more than 2 years. There's also not a whole lot going on inside. Something my colleagues at the Marshall Project have looked at, the lack of light. The windows are blurred. During my tour, there's no outdoor recreation. And during my tour of the jail, one thing that sticks out to me is this indoor basketball court. And it's got the backboard and it's got no goal. Buildings have been replaced, so have leaders. About a half a dozen people have led the corrections division since CJC opened, ranging from Dora Schreiro, who's on the lobby plaque, and Doug Burris, who just left. Like I said, I spoke with all of them at length to try to better understand this place, and it's really hard to condense everything they said. But Doug was the last one to serve, and he left in August, January to August, after doing a consultant's report about the jail, which I encourage you to look at because it has a whole string of things to look at. If you're looking for places to start, here's a consultant's report that's an open record. It's easy to find. The number one action item: solicit proposals for a recruitment firm to assist with hiring efforts. At that time, they had 74 frontline COs, correctional officers, and they had a budget for about 200. So 74 and a budget for 198 to be specific. 10 supervisors, CO2, were working and 28 were budgeted. I talked to Doug yesterday. He said when he left in August, corrections still needed approval from City Hall to hire that hiring firm. Meanwhile, apart from hiring, there's a shortage of programs. Programs are vital to, as what Burris described, he says, it's what keeps the jail from going into chaos. So pretrial services, job readiness, home plans. Oh my goodness, that one keeps coming up. As far as solutions go, what I hear with the reporting signals is the home plan. Condensing what everybody said, these former leaders, they said the jail is a microcosm of the broader community's toughest challenges: crime, untreated mental illness, concentrated poverty, and indifference. And it will not succeed until those issues are addressed. They said putting people in the isolated jail system hides those problems, and in some cases makes them worse. Gene Stubblefield, he said that the jail is so locked down that he described the City Justice Center as a potential powder keg. And I think that's how we've seen it sometimes portrayed in the news. Lastly, on the leaders and my presentation, long before this story, I was writing about the corrections division. I guess one of my biases as a reporter is I care. I think it's important. And I've tried to shed light on this topic. And so in 2015, right around the time the Marshall Project was starting to try to untangle mass incarceration, and Blake, when did Arch City Defenders start? Right around then too. That part. I wrote about the jail system, and Dale Glass was running it, and he was just getting started. He replaced Gene after 2 people escaped from the jail. They slid down a rope of bed sheets in this jail at 200 South Tucker. It's right across from City Hall. That's a news story. The mayor's going to hear about that. Gene wasn't in that position much longer, and that's when Dale eventually replaced him. Is that escape the problem, or is it something more complex? It was the tip of the iceberg. And so I'll end finally with something that Dale Glass told me. It's on a positive note. Something Dale Glass stuck with me for over a decade. And so when I was working on this story and I was cramming for this roundtable, I looked it up because it was in the record. And this is something that Dale told me a decade ago. He's full of optimism to run the corrections division. He said, I want the city to be able to one day look and say, corrections, they're doing a good job. And we're not ashamed of them. Glass added then, we need help.
Well, good evening, everyone. And I'm actually glad I'm following Jesse, because I think that helps set the stage for some of what I want to share. Again, my name is Blake Strode. I'm executive director of Arch City Defenders. And so I approach this subject as an attorney, as a civil rights lawyer, as an advocate, as a leader of an organization that is really focused on social and racial justice in this region. And we are an abolitionist organization. So we believe that the future that we are fighting for is one where we're not reliant on systems that capture and cage, but that care for people. And so that's what I'm anchored in. That's what my perspective is anchored in. And I want to start, as I start almost every presentation I do these days, and have for some time, which is to say that in my view, we are in a crisis and have been in a crisis actually for quite some time. And for me, that crisis looks like, in this region, thousands of people, in this state, tens of thousands of people, across this country, a couple million people locked away in cages. And we know some things about those people. We know that they are very likely to come from impoverished backgrounds. We know that they are more likely, much more likely, to be Black or brown in this country, in this region, much more likely to be Black. We know that they are very likely to have some substance use or mental health challenges. And despite knowing all of those things, despite knowing precisely who is targeted, precisely who is impacted by these systems, it persists day after day, year after year, and that picture looks exactly the same. And so I think anytime we're talking about jails and oversight and conditions of incarceration, it's really critical to just start from the premise that this should not be normalized. This is not normal. There's nothing about how we cage people in this country that is normal. And if you look at it from a globally comparative standpoint, the United States is an outlier, a tremendous outlier. It's not even close. If you look at the United States compared to other developed countries in the world, we not only cage more people, we do so at an order of magnitude that is off the scale. You can look at charts. There's a great resource called the Prison Policy Initiative. I highly suggest you just go sort of look around the site, and you'll see all of these charts and graphs that will show, one of my favorites on there is a bar graph that just sort of shows state by state and nation by nation what incarceration rates look like around the world. And the United States is at an end of this bar graph all by itself. Missouri, by the way, is 16th. If we were a country in the world, we would be the 16th highest incarceration rate in the world. And so from the very beginning, I think we have to really be anchored in this reality that this isn't about safety, really. It doesn't track with violent crime rates. It doesn't track with poverty rates. It is an aberration. And in my view, it's one that we should not accept. If we drill down a level, in the state of Missouri, there are about 40,000 people in cages. 10,000 of those are in local jails. And part of what that means is that the vast majority of those folks actually haven't even been convicted of anything yet. Most people who are in local jails are there pre-trial, and they're there because a court has either decided that they should stay there until trial, or, as is the case in most jurisdictions, this really isn't so true in the city of St. Louis anymore because of some reforms we've had. But in most jurisdictions, it's still the case that that's driven by cash bail, by people that can't come up with enough money to free themselves from those cages. And so that's the default. When we start talking about who's in the jail, that's who's there, and that's how they got there. I want to say a word about the human toll. I'm not going to spend too much time because we could spend a very long time, but I want to honor the framing here that's about incarceration and community health, I think was the language. And one of the things we know is that incarceration has a devastating impact on community health, and that happens at along a number of different dimensions. So one is legal. So I'm a lawyer. One of the things I can tell you is someone being in the criminal legal system at any level, and particularly if they're incarcerated, is very likely to create compounding legal problems. So you're very likely to have not just criminal problems, housing issues, access to benefits, consumer issues, all sorts of things that compound when people are incarcerated. Housing alone, formerly incarcerated people are 10 times more likely to be unhoused than the rest of the population. And it's perfectly legal to discriminate against people on the basis of a criminal record. Employment. I'm sure it won't shock anyone here that it's much harder to get a job after you've been convicted of a crime, after you've been incarcerated. And the unemployment rate for formerly incarcerated people is over 27%, which is more than 7 times the national average. Substance use, mental health, as I said, both of those are rampant in jails, and actually jails and prisons fuel those problems. So even those that enter a carceral facility and don't have some sort of diagnosed mental illness, they're much more likely to acquire one. I don't know if that's the right word, but they're much more likely to show symptoms of mental illness after being incarcerated. And then there's the family and community strain. I mean, the incredible level of hardship, trauma, toxic stress that exists in our communities and lives in our bodies when we have loved ones who are locked away in cages. So I want to really drill down to the city of St. Louis, the City Justice Center. Just for the sake of time, I won't go into it too much, but I will say that my organization, Arch City Defenders, really started its focus on local jails in the city of St. Louis with the other jail that's now closed, the Workhouse. And we started that work around 2017 after an uprising in that facility when people were screaming out of the windows that it was triple digits inside, they couldn't breathe, they were hot, there were buckets of ice being pushed into the middle of the room and people were fighting over it. That started for us what ended up being an 8-year fight to get that jail closed. And it is closed now. It's closed and fully razed to the ground, which I think is one of the things St. Louis should actually be very proud of. But in 2020, our focus it didn't shift to the CJC, but it certainly expanded very much to the CJC because we were in a pandemic. And one of the things that we were very aware of is that jails and prisons were spaces where the spread of COVID was very, very likely. And we now know it happened at a very high level. But at the very outset of the pandemic, all of the public health officials are telling us these are dangerous places for people to be with this disease. And so we set up a hotline, and we just started hearing from people inside the jail. And I mean, we would get like dozens of calls a day from people who would say, you know, we're not separated, we don't have any PPE, you know, there's the guards are being totally neglectful. They don't care if we get sick. We were just hearing this all the time. So we started publicly communicating about these concerns we were hearing. We had families calling us, my loved one's in there. He says he's sick. He says no one's responding. He says someone else has been locked away in a cell because now they're coughing and they were just in the same cell as them and no one is checking on them. No one's testing them, nothing. And so this was going on for months. We set this up in the spring of 2020. So when everyone started paying attention to the crisis in the CJC was at the very end of 2020, beginning of 2021. When there was an uprising in the jail, people broke out the windows in the jail. They were all over the news. It was all over national television. And suddenly it was, what's the crisis that's going on in the jail? But people all over St. Louis had been saying for months that there was a crisis inside of the jail. And that's a very familiar story, that people inside of jails and prisons are ignored, that their concerns aren't actually validated, that there's no real response to them from the people in power. And that's what we've seen, I think, with the CJC. When we think about many of the, you just heard some of the statistics about deaths in the CJC. The one I'd written down before today was 20 people who have died since 2020. That's an astounding number, and it's a shameful number. And on top of that, the response from the people that are actually tasked with operating this facility has largely been a lack of transparency. It's been a lack of accountability. It's been saying that the things that people say about their experiences in that jail aren't true. You can't believe them. They're liars. They're criminals. That's what we've heard time and time again. And so I think one lesson, I'm supposed to say a word about solutions, but I've got 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna make sure I say something about solutions. But one solution I do want to make sure to put into the space is a very simple one, which is to listen to people who are actually most impacted, to take seriously what they say, to validate their experiences. Now, trust but verify. You can do research, you can go see, but we can't continue to ignore people who are most marginalized in our society. And there's no one more marginalized than those that we've locked away in cages. In 2021, we actually ended up filing 2 federal lawsuits, one shortly after the other. One was on behalf of our client, Anthony Tillman, who was a paraplegic man who had been denied access to a shower in the CJC. And it took a federal lawsuit to get the jail to commit that they were actually going to provide him with a shower. Now that's one person.
There is no audio.
So I'm an investigator with the Civilian Oversight Board, and some of my remarks are going to really line up, I think, with some of what's already been shared, given the history. And I want to give a little bit of an underpinning to the Civilian Oversight Board itself. It didn't materialize out of nowhere. Back in 2009, 16 years ago, I did a report when I was working for the ACLU of Eastern Missouri as a racial justice manager. We did an investigation into the jails that long ago, and all of the very same issues that have been identified by the previous two speakers were present then as they were present prior to that. And the Civilian Oversight Board that we work for is the result of a 20-year effort from the community, the people in the community pushing, pressing for an entity that could provide some accountability, some level of accountability. Part of the trauma that the community experiences when we talk about our jails is this idea that no one is safe in them, and no one can help the people who are not safe in them, and no one will be held accountable for creating the conditions in which people feel not safe in them. And so I want that to be understood, that this work that we do, myself as an investigator, Commissioner Mylan, who's over it, Louisa Lyles as an investigator, is possible through the will of the community and responsive to the long and lived experiences of people who have been inside our facilities. And the specific thing that I want to talk about today is a window of opportunity, talking about solutions, a window of opportunity. And this is in real time and in real life. It is not pie in the sky, hypothetical. It is absolutely a solution that I think is available to us, and it is found in the ordinance that established this body. The window exists because we have a new commissioner at the CJC, brand new. You have a new public safety director, brand new. You have a new administration running the city, all new people with a brand new opportunity to adhere to the ordinance that created us, thus responding to the community and empowering the community through the powers that the ordinance grants to us. And I'm going to go through them very briefly because I want to leave plenty of time for discussion, but I think it's important that I specifically lay out as concisely as I can what we are here to do. The purpose and the ordinance of the Division of Civilian Oversight is to protect the safety of the public and employees of the city, to strengthen the integrity of and public confidence in criminal justice institutions, to promote transparency, fairness, and public accountability to professional standards. In the Division of Corrections, to conduct thorough and impartial, independent professional standards inquiries into alleged corrections professional misconduct, empowering independent citizen boards to render impartial and informed oversight and develop policy recommendations and advice that will address systemic problems and practices in corrections operations and as regards detention facilities, to ensure such operations and conditions of confinement are safe, sanitary, and respectful of detainees and the public's rights and dignity, and protect the health and safety of the public and detainees in the Division of Corrections. Now, these next two pieces of language are very important. The Civilian Oversight Commissioner and Civilian Oversight investigators and staff shall, as provided herein, be broadly authorized to independently investigate, conduct, and oversee the investigatory matters defined as professional standards inquiries. Certain events or occurrences, because of their extraordinary nature, shall automatically be the subject of professional standards inquiry as provided therein, namely those involving discharge of firearms or other uses of force that lead to or contribute to serious injury or death of any person, as well as the death of any person from any potential cause in a detention facility. Oversight investigators and civilian oversight staff shall have broad authority to examine and evaluate a division of corrections policies, procedures, and operations and detention incidents. That's the letter and spirit of the law. That is what we are supposed to be empowered to do. We are, in the ordinance, supposed to respond to the scene, for example, of a death inside the CJC, interview witnesses, interview staff, be provided with reports in a timely manner. To date, none of that has happened consistently, but there is an opportunity. When you talk about a solution, and it's available to all of us involved in this process, if we are committed to being intentional about adhering to the law that the city itself created. We didn't write the law. We operate under it. So again, the opportunity, my optimism lies in this new window of opportunity with the new commissioner of the CJC, a new director of public safety, a new administration in City Hall to revisit how responsive we are collectively to the will of community as it's reflected in this ordinance, with the heavy responsibility of investigating what happens inside those walls. And it is an opportunity not only for the detainees, but city employees as well. As me and my colleagues frequently discuss in our office, the opportunity exists also to improve conditions based on what we may or may not learn, to improve policy, thereby improving outcomes based on what we may or may not learn, to establish a new and better system, which creates better outcomes for everyone. So in that respect, I'm hopeful that everybody is going to come to the table. I know we've discussed among ourselves an opportunity for some of those people to even be part of one of these roundtables and have that conversation with the community and maybe talk about a new commitment to following the letter and spirit of the ordinance and allowing us to really have the opportunity to be effective in the role that we've been assigned. I'm hopeful, but we'll see. I do know that I'm largely in agreement. You know, I used to be a police officer in this city. I see one of my former colleagues right here, former Police Chief John Hayden, is in the house. And I can tell you that much of what I saw when I was working in the city is a result of a lot of the conditions that you heard Blake describe. Poverty drives crime, man. People are not born criminals. But if you put the conditions of deprivation that you see in some parts of our city relative to housing, employment, healthcare, education, and you put those conditions anywhere on earth and add guns into the mix, you could be in Vladivostok, you could be in St. Petersburg, Russia, wherever. Those conditions will create the outcomes that you see in some of our most challenged communities. So until we respond to the conditions around crime that are at the foundation of it, you're going to continue to produce the kinds of outcomes we see, which is the poorest people getting locked up with the least resources. I was just saying today, to your point, former Chief Hayden, relative to the Supreme Court and some of its rulings, you know, I'm not really sure the rule of law is even a thing anymore, man. It's how much money do you have? How much power do you have? And then we'll adjust the sliding scale accordingly. Because as you pointed out, Blake, you know, a lot of our convicted felons have trouble with housing, employment, but some of them get to be president of the United States. So, you know, I'm going to close by saying the opportunity exists. And I think in that ordinance really is a solution, or it's responsive in the context of solutions to the community's interests and challenges that it has faced historically and continues to face to date when it comes to our people being locked up. So I'm hopeful that the conversation continues after the last presenter gets a chance to speak with you. And I'll finish with that.
I'll have to take the microphone off. My name is Louisa Lyles. Commissioner Milan introduced me as being an investigator. I'm stepping away from the podium sometimes, as an investigator with the Division of Civilian Oversight. And she also mentioned the fact that I was an investigator with the Division of Corrections for 14 years. What she did not say, prior to that, oh, sorry about that. Prior to that, I was also an investigator with the Circuit Attorney's Office. So Jesse, I do remember the old city jail. Cora, I remember the old city jail. And I remember looking out my window as an investigator in the felony division, looking out and seeing people who looked like me, young people who looked like me in shackles and handcuffs. It reminded me of slavery. It really did. It had an impact on me. So one of the things, I won't go into it so much this evening, but one of the things I had to tell the people that I came in contact on a regular basis, because they were not incarcerated, they may not have had family members who were incarcerated or friends, had to remind them that the people who are detained in the city jail are part of our community. You know, I had to, being an investigator with the Circuit Attorney's Office, I had to stand up and say, they're not a caseload. And it's easy for us as a society to view people as something less than us. So I just had to just put that out there. I want to let you know that. In April of this year, the Marshall Project put out a report titled The Unbearable Darkness of Jail. And this article, it talked about it, the impact of very little lighting in the jails, and definitely not fresh air. As a matter of fact, I'm going to read one of the statements that a detainee made as he was getting released that day, and he was going from the city jail to the courthouse. And he said, when he saw the sun for the first time in over a year, during a transfer from the city jail to the courthouse, he later recalled he glazed up at the sun and took a deep breath. Now, a whole year. And I remember people asking me all the time, where do you work at, Louisa? And I said, I work for the Division of Correction. So do you work in that beautiful building on Tucker with all that pretty glass? I had to tell, it's not a window. People think it's a window. Like Jesse said, somebody said, is that a hotel or some type of federal building? There's very little light. And as a result of that little light, it has a physical impact on individuals who are incarcerated. In fact, there's a term for that. It's called post-incarceration syndrome. That's a term they use to describe the mental health and the social challenges experienced by individuals after they leave the correctional facility. There's a stigmatism. I thinking about, when people leave the facility and they go out into the community, go back to the same neighborhood they came from before. And unless they have some type of resources to help them out, and we all know that resources are what? Limited. We also know something else happens when you go back to the community. The first thing you see somebody do, they look out there and go, is that so-and-so? Was he incarcerated? He's out of jail now? And we unfortunately treat people who have been incarcerated like they're still incarcerated. We don't go up to them and say, hey, I'm glad to see you back in this community. We don't say, what can I do to help you out? What do you need? We usually don't do that. We start locking our doors, calling ADT or whoever else we got to call to put more burglar alarm systems in our house. We start locking up our cars. We don't treat them like they're human beings, but they are. They are part of our community. As a matter of fact, they say that when a person has left the facility, when they talk about post-incarceration syndrome, they have anxiety and depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance use. They go back to the neighborhood, they're going back to the same people. Because guess what? One reason I thought about why they started using drugs again, not only the fact that it gets rid of the pain of the stigmatism we put on them, but also we don't offer them a meal. We don't offer any money. Somebody offers some drugs before we offer them a handshake or a hug. Maybe we have treated people better, they wouldn't go back to that life. And that social withdrawal. Like I said, we don't welcome with open arms. As a matter of fact, unfortunately, the family don't a lot of times welcome them with open arms. They say there are approximately 45% of the adults in the United States have had an immediate family member incarcerated for at least one night. That's according to the Prison Policy Institute. And 45% of all adults have had a immediate family member that's been incarcerated. And 35% of people who have had an extended family member are incarcerated. Now, what effects does that have on the family? If you have a loved one that's incarcerated and you're a woman, they say you're more likely to have heart attack, stroke, depression, and obesity. Not to mention the financial impact it has on the individual. They talk about the city jail. I can tell you this. A lot of times you hear in reports that people are not getting their medicine when in the jail. Having been an investigator for 14 years, I'll share this with you. What I found out, a lot of times when someone's there, they don't take their medication, they refuse. You know why? Because when the city sends, or any in-course of detention facility send that bill to the state to pay for the medication, the state is looking and say, hey, didn't we just send them a Social Security check or an SSI check? They're incarcerated. We're not going to be paying for twice because they send the detention facility a check, the state does, and they're not going to give you a check too. So guess what happens? They cut off the check for the person that's incarcerated. Now that person may be the breadwinner for the family. That means now they're being incarcerated is impacting their family. They're providing income for rent, food. That's more stress for them, and also more stress for the individual at home trying to take care of the children. And let's say what impact does it have on the children? Mental health and emotional well-being.
I'm sorry, y'all definitely ain't gotta wait. Here, mama.
Huh? I'm hearing something. Okay. Anyway, but I'm just saying it has an impact on the children, and we need to understand. We have children in the school. If you have a situation where both of your parents are incarcerated, mentally, I know as a child, I liked going home at the end of the day and I saw my mom and my dad sit at the table and have a meal. But we have children who are both mother and father incarcerated, and that means what happens then? The grandparents end up raising the child all too often. I remember when I worked for the circuit attorney's office, I met a woman, she was 72 years old, had been working for the post office for quite a few years. She was looking forward to her retirement, but her daughter got hooked on drugs. And when she went to jail, she said, my daughter got clean. But when she got out, right back in that same community, because guess what? That was the community that welcomed her back, not the community that her mother and her neighbors, they didn't welcome her back. And her daughter ended up ODing and dying. The father of the children, he was on drugs as well. So this lady sat there and she said, I can't get child support. I have 4 grandchildren I have to raise now. The oldest one was 15, the youngest one was 2. She was 72 years old. And she sat there, and I still can see her today. And she says, my friends asked me, hey, let's get together for lunch. I can't go to lunch. I got to go to work. And I got to work overtime. And that woman sat there, she said, I love my grandchildren. That's the impact it has on the community. I love my grandchildren, but I have one that's 15 and one that's 2. I got to start helping with homework all again, buying clothes all again. And she sat there and cried for over half an hour in my office, in the Circuit Attorney's office, because she knew one thing: I will never be able to retire. I will die. That had an impact on her health, heart problems. So when a person is incarcerated, it not only affects the person who's incarcerated, it affects the whole community financially. When you have a family member that's incarcerated and you're trying to come with their bond money and get them out, that can be very difficult sometimes. You have to make a choice between paying the rent or paying for the bond. And then depending on what they're in there for, you got to make a choice on how I'm going to pay the attorney so they can beat the case. But also, while they're incarcerated, financially it impacts everybody, because guess what? Those telephone calls are not free. You have to pay, what was it, 12 cents a minute for a telephone call? So they can't, so if someone's incarcerated, they don't have family they can afford to pay, put money where they say on the books, that's called their account, then they can't call their children. They can't call their loved ones. That's a problem. I started off talking about the individual who was talking about how he looked up and hadn't seen the sun for over a year. Most of you can identify with this. When we go to a doctor and we get a physical, a lot of us hear the doctor say all too often, you got a vitamin D deficiency. And what they say, you need to get out in the sun a little more often, right? And you go get some vitamin D supplements. But someone who's incarcerated is not able to do that. So when you have a vitamin D deficiency, you have a lot of other things that happen as well. That leads to the depression, the anxiety, the hopelessness, the things that we can have an opportunity being out in the world, be able to do something corrective, but an individual who's incarcerated does not have that. Then we're going to talk about the food. Sometimes we get a chance to decide what we're going to eat, but when you're incarcerated, that's not the case. Whatever the contract they have with the person providing the food, that's what you eat. When you go into any jails, the first thing they do, they have an intake process. They ask you what your health issues are. Now we're going to talk about the stigmatism. If a person is HIV positive, they're less likely to tell that medical person who's asking them questions what issues you have, tell them they're HIV positive. They're not going to tell them that. So that means what? Kind of like what my colleagues and the presenters here said today, that how disease runs rapid inside the jail, because they're not going to admit that. The only thing they test for when you go into jail is what? Tuberculosis. Past that, they don't check. And we already know that sometimes the conditions are not the best, but we also know, just like they said, as a community, as a society, we have to get involved to make sure things are provided. One of the things we have to do is make sure we have the funding. We already know the government is cutting back on quite a few things right now. So we have to take the time, we have the extra money or programs, donate to the programs that's providing assistance to the individuals who are detained. Donate money to the programs that will assist them when they get ready to leave the facility. That will make a difference. We all have as I used to have a former deputy superintendent of jail say, what's your nickel in the quarter? We all have a nickel in that quarter. Thank you.
You can get away with it. Yeah.
So this is our segment where we can hear from you, either posing a question or you may have a comment. I feel obligated to say that our office is funded by the city of St. Louis, and our jail is supported by the city of St. Louis. I don't see this as a we, them situation, but I do see this as an opportunity. And as one of our speakers pointed out, we do have the opportunity now to be involved and to be engaged. So what's an immediate step that we can take to mitigate health impacts of incarceration? Blake, I think you mentioned one. Someone mentioned the importance of being able to be heard or to have someone to listen to you. Anybody on the panel want to respond to that?
Well, is this on? Test? Yeah. Yeah, Commissioner. One of the things that jumps out at me is policy, right? Relative to health, medical treatment, any other issue inside the jail or anywhere else, there's policies. So our ability to ensure policy adherence would probably be a step in the right direction. As you've said, or as I think Blake referenced earlier, we get a lot of calls and reports. My colleague Cora Baker, I know, gets calls every day relative to health care issues. And on the surface, it sounds like everything's great. But if you dig down with some of the information that we receive, we know that policy adherence is sometimes in doubt. So our ability to ensure that policy is adhered to would at least be a step in the right direction to ensure better health outcomes for people inside the CJC.
Any other comments? What would you prioritize if you could change one thing today? What would you prioritize?
I'd jump in there. I think maybe y'all would agree with me. I mean, this is biased, but transparency. I feel like as a city resident and as a reporter, that would be much better to have transparency. And the new commissioner who's coming, he's coming from St. Louis County, correct? He's here, he started. And I've never met him before, but I was at the St. Louis County Jail recently working on another story about people with mental illness in jail. And I met Keto Bess, who, I enjoyed talking to Keto Bess. He allowed me into his office, which I like, the transparency. Yes, come on in, let's talk. Just being able to visit. I used to work in Texas. I love that idea. We're just going to visit. Well, so we talked for a while, and I know Keto is now leaving, but before he left, he kind of laid out some of the tools that they have in St. Louis County, and that's a toolbar. You can go to their website, and on it, I can find out who's in jail by their offense level, C, D, and E felonies. I can click on the boxes and find out how many people are in here for C, D, and E felonies. Why is that important? Well, right now that jail is really full of people. It's got like 1,300 people in it. Of course, you can't tell because you don't know. A lot of people don't know it's even a jail, right, when they're walking around downtown Clayton. You could click on that and find out who in here has a misdemeanor. There still are some, right? And so it can that portal will tell you how long they've been confined. I fought for months to get a roster of who's in the St. Louis jail, the city jail, and how long they've been there. Okay. So that's available. They also, I believe it has on there, how often they've used the restraint chair and other things that, we fight for to find out what's going on in our jails. And so why do you do this? He said, I think it's important so folks can know about their jail. They can know what's going on. It's transparent. You got to know who's in custody. To me, it educates folks on what's going on in the jail, and I will leave it up to the public to ask the why.
Yeah, just to reiterate, because I think it's really important to me. The one thing that I would like to see is a commitment from all parties involved to being intentional about adhering and following the ordinance and the powers that it grants to the Civilian Oversight Board and its investigators. I think it would go a long way towards establishing some new level of faith out in the community that they are heard and seen, valued and respected, and that steps are going to be taken to address whatever issues exist inside the Justice Center. But we have to have access and we have to have the full scope of what is allowed under the ordinance for us to be able to do. Absent that, I think we're going to continue to see some of the problems. So I'm hopeful that the new commissioner at the CJC, the new public safety director, and the new administration can all build consensus around the idea that this was a law that was passed and this is what we should stick to.
And I also like to say that to piggyback off of what Reddy just got saying, having access to the jails, we have a staff that's absolutely awesome. 3 of our investigators, including myself, actually worked in the city jail. So we know policy and procedure of the jail. We also were instrumental in working with the training academy for several years. So having that knowledge is beneficial. We have another individual in our Reddick, where we know his background for his all the agencies he's worked with, ACLU, Urban League, et cetera, et cetera. But in his also have been a police officer. We have another investigator in office was also a police officer. So extremely knowledgeable. We can be of a great assistance to being able to help them with the shortage of staff they have. We are a staff of individuals who can go in and assist in numerous areas. And having that opportunity makes a difference. I do believe the Division of Civilian Oversight, if we're given an opportunity, we also can't command a lot of respect. Because when a person is incarcerated and they feel hopeless because, like they said, they need to be heard. Well, we need to have an opportunity to hear what they have to say. Not everyone there has a tablet. Tablets are a shortage. But we're in a position where we can go in and speak to them one-on-one. And they get that individual attention. We're also in a position to go back and make sure things are being taken care of. Because one of the things the Division of Civilian Oversight has to do is generate reports that not only do the Commissioner of Corrections would get that report and the Director of Public Safety, but also the community would also know what's going on as well. So that would definitely greatly address the issue of transparency.
I just want to underscore one thing that I said briefly in my remarks, which is, connected to this, civilian oversight piece, which I agree it would certainly be an improvement to have real functional civilian oversight in the jail. I do not believe that's possible without independent counsel for the oversight bodies. We represent someone named Janice Mensah, who some of you may know this story, was on the DFOB, the Detention Facilities Oversight Board, was the chair, then was the vice chair, attempting to do civilian oversight, went to the jail, ended up being arrested, and then charged, prosecuted, and that we defeated that prosecution. Now Janice is suing the city for civil rights claims. But the same city councilor's office, yes, they were on the Detention Facilities Oversight Board at the jail trying to talk to people after a death at the jail at the time they were arrested. But the part I want to underscore is that the same city councilor's office was prosecuting Janice, counseling the DFOB, and preparing to defend the city on civil rights charges. Now, how can you do all of those things at once? How could that body be an effective counsel and represent the interests of the oversight body that Janice was there representing when they went to the jail. It's ludicrous. It will not work until there's independent counsel for the DFOB, for all of the oversight bodies.
Very interesting. I do want to express that I have met our new commissioner for the City Justice Center, and he has impressed on me, to me, that they are open and they want to work with us. I felt that a door was opening when Mayor Spencer stated that the mayor wanted to make an unannounced visit to the City Justice Center. And so we were there and we were able to go in and we were able to walk around the City Justice Center and see for ourselves what actually was going on. We attended a graduation that was held at the City Justice Center. There were probably around 20 or 25 detainees who were graduating. The title of the program was From Prisons to Prosperity. And several of those individuals that were graduating, 5 of them already had employment. So having an opportunity, having a second chance to be able to be a productive citizen is very important. I think partnerships is important. And the question would be, what partnerships do you think that we need between community with our local jail and public health? How do we bring our educators? How do we bring all of our entities and interests together so that if we can help one person to leave the City Justice Center, we want more than one, to be successful in turning their life around? Well, how do we do that?
Well, I'm going to use my buzzword for the day. You have to be intentional about doing it. When I was at the circuit attorney's office working in diversion, that was our priority, consistent with the idea, Blake, that our courts are not the end-all, be-all solution for people's public problems, i.e. mental health, i.e. unemployment, i.e. drug addiction, and these other things. We collected resources. We went out actively and recruited and pooled resources for people because our thought was, what would this person's life look like had they had different choices available to them and different resources available to them to make a different choice other than the one they made that allowed them to be put into the system or processed into the system. So it's a choice. The people who are in positions to affect outcomes relative to policy at CJC and everywhere else can start to look outside of the traditional model and say maybe there's a better way forward, and that involves bringing some of the resources that you said we need, get those people to the table and say, hey, how can you help us do this better? And how can you help us produce a better outcome for the people at the CJC?
I see 2 of our board members who are in the audience, and not to put you on the spot, but I see Usman and I see Kanika, and I'm just wondering if you have any comments or anyone else in the audience. And is this Chief Hayden? Sir, are you Chief Hayden? I see your name on a placard at 1520 Market Street all the time. So this is the first time for me to see who Chief Hayden is. But your name is still in print at 1520 Market Street, telling us what we cannot bring into that building. But you have worked in law enforcement and public safety. Usman, you have your hand up.
Thanks for organizing this, first of all. I think it's really important to be able to have these spaces in the first place. Going back to the question you'd asked previously, in terms of solutions, I think there needs to be a multi-pronged approach, not just looking at the long term in terms of, and I think of these issues of transparency in enforcing ordinance as something that needs to happen in the long term. Would like to happen in as short as term as possible. However, the reality is the DFOB, before it even began functioning, had an injunction that kept it from doing its work for quite some time. So it needs to be strategic. It needs to have the right partners at the table, and we need to ensure that everyone is on the same page. Because if two people decide they have a great idea, and then there's lawsuits and injunctions keeping us from doing the work that we think is a good idea, that transparency is not going to work in the long run. In the short term, we also need to think about the day-to-day of these detainees. As we had the conversation here today, we have lack of access to basic amenities. Human decency is lacking in the CJC. That is not something that can wait a year. That is not something that can wait 5 months. That is something that should have happened from the day that that CJC opened. When we were having conversations about tearing down the workhouse, we also need to have conversations of what are the alternatives for these detainees, because now they are in cages within a cinder box with no access to the outdoors. That is one thing that, to me, does not show that we are valuing the lives inside of that building. And that is not something that is sustainable as an institution and as a city if we are not prioritizing our most vulnerable in this city. Going to, I believe, what was the second question? This last one?
What small changes can we implement? Well, without waiting for policy reform.
I think events like this are helpful. I think bringing in the new commissioner, having conversations that are ongoing besides our regular meetings as a DFOB with the people that are in charge of making decisions moves the needle between those meetings, so that when we are showing up to these meetings, we have work and an agenda already in front of us to do. And it's not just working through go back to what we haven't done in the last few months. I think there's a lot of progress that can be made, but that also means working with our partners at city government to make sure that we have a fully established DFOB, to make sure that we have independent counsel, and to make sure that we have regular and transparent access to CJC records.
Thank you. Well, we tried to start on time and we're going to end on time. I want to recognize two of my colleagues who have been very supportive for us organizing this program. Jacqueline Dace, who is the executive director for the St. Louis Arts Work, and some of the artwork by the youth are featured in the lobby area. I also want to thank Dr. Davis, who has just opened the doors and said, yes, please come to Harris-Stowe State University. We can have our on-site roundtables here in this beautiful facility. So we thank you for your leadership and your participation. And for all of our panelists, we have a certificate for you. And the certificate, this is to Jesse. Jesse, do you want to come up? The certificate of appreciation is presented to Jesse Bogan. We award the certificate for your contribution to the impact of incarceration on community and mortality. Your motivational presentation educated and enhanced the understanding of all those present. Thank you, Jesse. Yes. We have one for Blake. I just learned that Blake and Dr. Davis know my aunt, who is deceased now, but she was a tennis advocate. And Blake and Dr. Davis are both engaged in tennis, so it warms my heart to know that they knew my beautiful Aunt Bertha. So, Blake, the certificate is for you. Louisa and Reddit, we have a certificate for you. And Dr. Davis, and Miss Jacqueline Dace, we have a certificate for you as well. Louisa, thank you. Reddit, thank you. Thank you for attending our program. I believe we have a League of Women Voters member in the audience, and I just renewed my membership, so we're glad to have your participation here today too. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Our program is concluded. We do have some refreshments. Please avail yourselves to that. Thank you.
Appreciate you guys. Thanks a lot.